The Sound Machine by Roald Dahl. It was a hot summer evening, and Klausner walked quickly through the front gate and around the side of the house and into the garden at the back. He went on down the garden until he came to a wooden shed. He unlocked the door, went inside, and closed the door behind him. The interior of the shed was an unpainted room. Against one wall, on the left, there was a long wooden workbench, and on it, among a littering of wires and batteries and small sharp tools, there stood a black box about 3 feet long, the shape of a child's coffin. Klausner moved across the room to the box. The top of the box was open, and he bent down and began to poke and peer inside it among a mass of different colored wires and silver tubes. He picked up a piece of paper that lay beside the box, studied it carefully, put it down, peered inside the box and started running his fingers along the wires, tugging gently at them to test the connections, glancing back at the paper, then into the box, then at the paper again, checking each wire. Then he put a hand around to the front of the box where there were 3 dials, and he began to twiddle them, watching at the same time the movement of the mechanism inside the box. All the while, he kept speaking softly to himself, nodding his head, smiling sometimes, his hands always moving, the fingers moving swiftly, deftly inside the box, his mouth twisting into curious shapes when a thing was delicate or difficult to do, speaking to himself, saying,
Where is my diagram? Ah, yes, of course. Yes, that's right. And now? Good, yes. Yes.
Well. So this is where you hide yourself in the evenings.
Hello, Scott.
I happened to be passing by, so I dropped in to see how you were. There was no one in the house, so I came down here. How's that throat of yours been behaving?
It's all right. It's fine.
Well, now that I'm here, I might as well have a look at it.
Please don't be troubled. I'm quite cured. I'm fine.
But you've got your hat on.
Oh, have I?
What's this? You making a radio?
No, just fooling around.
It's got rather complicated looking innards.
Yes.
It's a frightening looking thing, isn't it?
It's just an idea. It has to do with sound, that's all.
Good heavens, man. Don't you get enough of that sort of thing all day in your work?
I like sound.
So it seems. Well, I won't disturb you. Glad your throat's not worrying you anymore. What's it really for? You've made me inquisitive.
Klausner looked down at the box, then at the doctor, and he reached up and began gently to scratch the lobe of his right ear. There was a pause. The doctor stood by the door, waiting, smiling.
All right, I'll tell you if you're interested. Well, it's like this. The theory is very simple, really. The human ear, you know that it can't hear everything. There are sounds that are so low-pitched or so high-pitched that it can't hear them. Speaking very roughly, any note so high that it has more than 15,000 vibrations a second, we can't hear it. Dogs have better ears than us. You know, you can buy a whistle whose note is so high-pitched that you can't hear it at all. But a dog can hear it. And up the scale, higher than the note of that whistle, there is another note. A vibration, if you like. But I prefer to think of it as a note. You can't hear that one either. And above that is another, and another, rising right up the scale forever and ever and ever. An endless succession of notes an infinity of notes. There is a note, if only our ears could hear it, so high that it vibrates 1,000,000 times a second, and another 1,000,000 times as high as that, and on, higher and higher, as far as numbers go. Infinity, eternity, beyond the stars. I believe that there is a whole world of sound about us all the time that we cannot hear. It is possible that up there in those high-pitched, inaudible regions, there is new, exciting music being made with subtle harmonies and fierce, grinding discords. A music so powerful that it would drive us mad if only our ears were tuned to hear the sound of it. There may be anything. For all we know, there may be...
Yes, but it's very improbable.
Why not? Why not? You see that fly? What sort of noise is that fly making now? None that one can hear. But for all we know, the creature may be whistling like mad on a very high note, or barking or croaking or singing a song. It's got a mouth, hasn't it? It's got a throat.
Well, so you're going to check up on that?
Some time ago, I made a simple instrument that proved to me the existence of many odd, inaudible sounds. I have sat and watched the needle of my instrument recording the presence of sound vibrations in the air when I myself could hear nothing. And those are the sounds I want to listen to. I want to know where they come from and who or what is making them.
And that machine on the table, then, is that going to allow you to hear these noises?
It may. Who knows? So far, I've had no luck. But I've made some changes in it, and tonight I'm ready for another trial. This machine is designed to pick up sound vibrations that are too high-pitched for reception by the human ear and convert them to a scale of audible notes. I tune it in, almost like a radio.
How do you mean?
It isn't complicated. Say I wish to listen to the squeak of a bat. That's a fairly high-pitched sound, about 30,000 vibrations a second. The average human ear can't quite hear it. Now, if there were a bat flying around this room and I tuned in at 30,000 on my machine, I would hear the squeaking of the bat very clearly. I would even hear the correct note, F sharp, or B flat, or whatever it might be, but merely at a much lower pitch.
And you're going to try it tonight?
Yes.
Well, I wish you luck. My goodness, I must fly. I must call again sometime to find out what happened.
For a while longer, Klausner fussed about with the wires in the black box. Then he went out and closed the door behind him. He stood there in the garden beside the wooden table, so pale, small, and thin that he looked like an ancient, consumptive, bespectacled child. The sun had gone down. There was no wind, no sound at all. From where he stood, he could see over a low fence into the next garden, and there was a woman walking down the garden with a flower basket on her arm. He watched her for a while without thinking about her at all. Then he tuned to the box on the table and pressed a switch on its front. He put his left hand on the volume control and his right hand on the knob that moved the needle across a large central dial, like the wavelength dial of a radio. The dial was marked with many numbers in a series of bands, starting at 15,000 and going up to 1,000,000. And now he was bending forward over the machine. His head was cocked to one side in a tense, listening attitude. His right hand was beginning to turn the knob. The needle was traveling slowly across the dial, so slowly that he could hardly see it move, and in the earphones he could hear a faint, spasmodic crackling. Behind this crackling sound, he could hear a distant humming tone, which was the noise of the machine itself, but that was all. As he listened, he became conscious of a curious sensation, a feeling that his ears were connected to his head by a thin, stiff wire like a tentacle, and that the wires were lengthening, that the ears were going up and up toward a secret and forbidden territory, a dangerous transonic region where ears had never been before, and had no right to be. The little needle crept slowly across the dial, and suddenly, he stared around him as if expecting to see the person who had shrieked. There was no one in sight except the woman in the garden next door, and it was certainly not she. She was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. Klausner looked around him, searching instinctively for the source of the noise. The woman next door was the only living thing in sight. He saw her reach down, take a rose stem in the fingers of one hand, and snip the stem with a pair of scissors. It came at the exact moment when the rose stem was cut. At this point, the woman straightened up, put the scissors in the basket with the roses, and turned to walk away.
Mein Gott, the roses. It's the roses. Mrs. Saunders! Oh, Mrs. Saunders! Cut another one. Please, cut another one quickly.
Why, Mr. Klausner, what's the matter?
Please, do as I ask. Cut just one more rose.
Certainly, Mr. Klausner, if you like.
That's enough. No more, please. No more. I'm going to tell you something, Mrs. Saunders. Something that you won't believe. You have this evening cut a basket full of roses. You have, with a sharp pair of scissors, cut through the stems of living things, and each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. Did you know that, Mrs. Saunders?
No, I certainly didn't know that.
It happens to be true. I heard them shrieking. Each time you cut one, I heard the cry of pain. A very high-pitched sound, approximately 132,000 vibrations a second. You couldn't possibly have heard it yourself, but I heard it.
Did you really, Mr. Klausner?
You might say that a rosebush has no nervous system to feel with, no throat to cry with. You'd be right, it hasn't. Not like ours anyway. But how do you know, Mrs. Saunders? How do you know that a rosebush doesn't feel as much pain when someone cuts its stem in two as you would feel if someone cut your wrists off with a pair of garden shears? How do you know that? It's alive, isn't it?
Yes, Mr. Klausner. And good night.
Klausner went back to the table. He put on the earphones and stood for a while listening. He could still hear the faint spasmodic crackling sound and the humming noise of the machine, but nothing more. Slowly, he bent down and took hold of a small white daisy growing on the lawn. He took it between thumb and forefinger and slowly pulled upward and sideways until the stem broke. He took another daisy and did it again. He wasn't so sure now that it expressed pain. No, it wasn't pain. It was surprise. Or was it? It didn't really express any of the feelings or emotions known to a human being. It was just crying, a neutral, stony cry, a single, emotionless note expressing nothing. It had been the same with the roses. He had been wrong in calling it a cry of pain. A flower probably didn't feel pain. It felt something else, which we didn't know about. Something called toin or spurl or plenokment or anything you like. He stood up and removed the earphones. It was getting dark and he could see pricks of light shining in the windows of the dark houses all around him. Carefully, he picked up the black box from the table, carried it into the shed, and put it on the workbench. Then he went out, locked the door behind him, and walked up to the house. The next morning, Klausner was up as soon as it was light. He dressed and went straight to the shed. He picked the machine up and carried it outside, clasping it to his chest with both hands, walking unsteadily under its weight. He went past the house, out through the front gate, and across the road to the park. There he paused and looked around him. Then he went on until he came to a large tree, a beech tree, and placed the machine on the ground, close to the trunk of the tree. Quickly he went back to the house and got an axe from the coal cellar and carried it across the road into the park. He put the axe on the ground beside the tree. Then he looked around him again, peering nervously through the thick glasses in every direction. There was no one about. It was 6 in the morning. He put the earphones on his head and switched on the machine. He listened for a moment to the faint, familiar humming sound. Then he picked up the axe, took a stance with his legs wide apart, and swung the axe as hard as he could at the base of the tree trunk. The blade cut deep into the wood and stuck there. Klausner stared in horror at the place where the blade of the axe had sunk into the wood flesh of the tree. Then, gently, he took the axe handle, worked the blade loose, and threw the thing on the ground. With his fingers, he touched the gash the axe had made in the wood, touching the edges of the gash, trying to press them together to close the wound. For a while, he stood there with his hands upon the trunk of the great tree. Then suddenly, he turned away and hurried off out of the park, across the road, through the front gate, and back into his house. He went to the telephone, consulted the book, dialed the number, and waited. He held the receiver tightly in his left hand and tapped the table impatiently with his right. He heard the telephone buzzing at the other end, and then the click of a lifted receiver and a man's voice.
Hello? Yes?
Dr. Scott!
Yes, speaking.
Dr. Scott, you must come at once. Quickly, please.
Who is it speaking?
Klausner here, and you remember what I told you last night about my experiments with sound and how I hoped it might...
Yes, of course. What's the matter? Are you ill?
No, I'm not ill, but...
It's 6:30 in the morning, and you call me, but you're not ill.
Please come. Come quickly. I want someone to hear it. It's driving me mad. I can't believe it.
You really want me to get out of bed and come over now?
Yes, now, at once. Please.
All right then, I'll come.
Klausner sat down beside the telephone and waited. He tried to remember the shriek. He heard the click of the front gate latch, and he jumped up, went out, and saw the tall doctor coming down the path, his little black bag in hand.
Well, what's all the trouble?
Come with me, doctor. I want you to hear it. I called you because you're the only one I've told. It's over the road in the park. Will you come now?
Right, I'll come.
They went across the road into the park, and Klausner led the way to the great beech tree, at the foot of which stood the long, black coffin box of the machine, and the axe.
Why did you bring the machine out here?
I wanted a tree. There aren't any big trees in the garden.
And why the axe?
You'll see in a moment. But now, please, put on these earphones and listen. Listen carefully and tell me afterwards precisely what you hear. I want to make quite sure. Can you hear anything?
Can I what?
Can you hear anything?
Just a humming noise. What are you waiting for?
Nothing.
Watch out! Run, man! Quickly, run! Great heavens! That was a near one. I thought it had got you.
Did you hear it?
Hear what?
In the earphones. Did you hear anything when the axe struck?
Well, as a matter of fact, no, I'm not sure. I could be sure, but I don't suppose I had the earphones on for more than a second after the axe struck.
Yes, but what did you hear?
I don't know. I don't know what I heard. Probably the noise of the branch breaking.
What did it sound like? Exactly what did it sound like?
Oh, hell, I really don't know. I was more interested in getting out of the way. Let's leave it.
Dr. Scott, what did it sound like?
For God's sakes, how could I tell? With half the tree falling on me and having to run for my life. Well, we better get back.
Look, you stitch this up. You stitch this up quickly.
Don't be silly.
You do as I say. Stitch it up.
Don't be silly. I can't stitch through wood. Come on, let's get back.
So you can't stitch through wood?
No, of course not.
Have you got any iodine in your bag?
Yes, of course.
Then paint the cut with iodine. It'll sting, but that can't be helped.
Now look, let's not be ridiculous. Let's get back to the house and then...
Paint the cut with iodine.
All right. I'll paint it with iodine.
Make sure you get it right in. Now do the other one. The one just above it.
There you are. It's done.
Yes. That will do nicely. You'll come back and look at them tomorrow?
Oh, yes, of course.
And put some more iodine on.
If necessary, yes.
Thank you, Doctor.
Come on, we must go now.
He dropped the axe, and all at once he smiled. A wild, excited smile. And quickly the doctor went over to him, and gently he took him by the arm. Suddenly they were walking away, the two of them, walking silently, rather hurriedly, across the park, over the road, back into the house. This has been a production of The Sound Machine by Roald Dahl. Produced by Courtney Schumaker and Alec Grietsell. With Lotta Rautiainen as the narrator, Chase Peterson as Klausner, Alec Grietsell as the doctor, and Courtney Schumaker as Mrs. Saunders.